Hey there, it was always inevitable that I would eventually do an overview of the mainline DS Pokémon games. These games are near and dear to my heart, and judging by the age analytics of my audience, they probably are for you too. I'm excited to finally get to talk through each of these games and also rank them against each other just to spice things up a little bit. Basically the same thing I did with the 3DS era of Pokémon. My name is Silas, and thanks in advance for watching this video. Starting with the first DS titles, we have Pokémon Diamond and Pokémon Pearl. The first Pokémon game I ever played. Not the first Pokémon game I owned, I borrowed it off a friend, then played up to the first gym leader, but it still counts. Anyway, let's take ourselves back to the 27th of July, 2007, and start off with the Pokémon introduced in Pokémon Diamond and Pearl. Because where else are you going to start with a Pokémon game? Okay, it's time for me to commence my deep and intellectual dive into the starter Pokémon of Diamond and Pearl. He's a cute little monkey guy, look at him, he's so happy! Chimchar is an all-time classic fire starter. Sure, his design isn't anything crazy, seeing as he's pretty much Charmander but monkey, but he looks like a friend. And that's what's important. Monferno is a great natural growth of Chimchar. His white collar and blue brow makes him look a fair bit tougher, and again, he's Charmeleon, but monkey. I've always enjoyed his back sprite too. Love me some good Pokemon backshots. Infernape. Peak Pokemon. Even the name Infernape is badass. It feels like something a 7-year-old would come up with in the best way possible. Infernape's white collar has grown out, and the white fur now looks more like a vest and boots. I love how loose and limber he looks. His aura and design really sell you on the fact that this guy is a fighter. Also, they Kevin McAllistered his head, which just tops the design off perfectly. I get that people think there's been too many firefighting starters, and yeah, they're right. I mean, look at him, come on, it's so cool. Piplup is blue and round. What a marketable fellow, don't you think? It's a baby penguin. He looks like he has to hop around everywhere, and that's funny to think about in your head. Now, Prinplup. How do I describe Prinplup? It's like when your son hits puberty and isn't cute anymore, and you can see him transforming into an average bloke, just like you, even though you hoped he'd become so much more, and also probably has some form of drug dependency, but whatever. Empoleon is what happens when you show Prinplup train spotting and he decided to go to rehab and hit the gym with a newfound grind set. Empoleon is a Giga Chad penguin. He has a really cool crown, although I do think the design would pop off more if the light blue edges were white instead, but I still respect the vision they were going for here. Turtwig is a turtle, and he's green, and he has a little green sapling on his head. Now this is interesting here though. Grottle is a bigger turtle. He has a bush on his back because, you know, growth, grass types, you get the gist. I think Grottle is a little dull with his pale greens and browns. I would have put some darker colour in there to stop him looking so washed out. But all's well that ends well, Torterra is just massive, and as we all know, bigger is always better. He's got a full tree on his back, and is overall a huge tank of a being. He looks very angry, and hey, I'd be too if I had to lug a tree about with me wherever I go. I did deliberate a fair bit on the designs of the starters, but that's because I think starters best represent the design philosophy of each Pokemon generation. Now I'll run through some more Gen 4 Pokemon at a faster pace just to keep things moving. I like the new evolutions for past Pokemon Gen 4 introduces. Glaceon and Leafeon are slick evolutions with nice bubbly designs. Electivire, Togekiss and Rhyperior are great additions to their existing lines. You can tell they did them right because it feels weird to think about how they never used to be a part of the evolutionary chain before Gen 4. I mean, imagine being stuck with Togetic. That sounds awful. There's so many designs that jump out to me as cool in a very 2007 kind of way. You know, the year that gave us our first Linkin Park back to Optimus Prime speech. Do you get the vibe I'm talking about here? Yeah, you get it. Staraptor, Bibarel, Riolu, Lucario, Luxray, Garchomp, Bastiodon, Roserade, Gastrodon, Drifblim, Lopunny, Mismagius, I could go on. These Pokemon were the first designs I ever looked at as a toddler, and in that moment I decided that they were the coolest. Sure, nostalgia may affect my perception of Gen 4's Pokemon, but it's my video, and I get to do what I want. Go tell 4-year-old me that his taste in Pokemon sucks, and see how you feel about yourself afterwards, eh? I'll cap off the Pokemon segment with Diamond and Pearl's legendaries. The Lake Trio are the 3 smaller legendaries of these games. They nail the Mystic look with an embryo-esque design. I can't describe it, but each of them really do give off the vibe of each aspect of the human psyche they represent. Azelf representing willpower, Mesprit representing emotions, and Uxie representing knowledge. The mascot legendaries, Palkia and Dialga, are a feat of design if you ask me. Their appearance is fittingly alien. They look divine and threatening simultaneously, which is a good choice for the beings that rule over space and time. God, this is definitely my favourite genre of legendary Pokemon. Ones that don't resemble any earthly beings and radiate a mystical energy. Yep, they're definitely believable as beings that hold dominion over the space-time continuum. That's for sure. The same sentiment applies for Arceus as well, or Arceus, shut up, I don't care. Because, you know, look at it, that's definitely God. And Giratina? Well, that's definitely Satan. I love Giratina's design, and the credit for it goes to Diamond and Pearl, but I'll touch more on him in the Platinum segment. That's about it for the Pokemon in Diamond and Pearl. If you couldn't tell, I really like them. I feel like they just embody the image of what was considered cool in the early 2000s, and I'll take as much of that as I can get. The only real criticism I have of this selection is... where are the Fire-type Pokemon? There's hardly any of them. At least we have Infernape. What a cool Pokemon. Alright, so Pokemon Diamond and Pearl take place in the Sinnoh region, which is based on Hokkaido, the Northern Island of Japan. I honestly think the make or break point of a Pokemon game is the region it takes place in. It's a world you'll be exploring with your Pokemon, and seeing as Pokemon gameplay was basically solved way back in 1996, everything rests on if you like the world you're actually exploring. I'm just a sucker for chillier northern areas. They always fire the right neurons in my brain to make me feel good. So Sinnoh is starting off strong with me. The whole place has an air of mysticism to it. It's a modern location, but with areas here and there that link you back to a time long past. The mythology of the region is on display, with statues and cave paintings scattered across the towns and cities. Not to mention how Mount Coronet looms at the centre of the land, giving a sense of closeness to the divine forces mentioned in the Sinnoh myth. The towns and cities do a good job of feeling diverse from one another, and feel like small samples of different biomes in nature. Canalave City shows a community that's thrived from the incoming trade and goods being shipped into the port. It feels like a bridge to the rest of the world, with the river flowing right out into the sea, and of course there's Canalave Library, which is filled with tons of Pokemon lore, helping to tie Sinnoh to the past of the Pokemon world even more. Jubilife City is your classic technological city. I always forget that this city doesn't have a gym, but it makes up for that with places like the Global Terminal, which lets you battle and trade with players from across the world. Well, at least it used to, anyway. Jubilife is memorable since it's the first big city you visit in your journey. It's clearly the most developed settlement in Sinnoh, and you end up passing through it a few times on your journey, welcoming you with its catchy theme song every time you swing by. Veilstone City is a good time. It's cool to have all the buildings elevated on the rocks. Not very disabled friendly, but I guess they provide them with Abras or something to teleport up the stairs. Team Galactic's headquarters are situated here, and admittedly there's not much else here outside of that. Well, except for gambling. Sunny Shore City just looks real nice and has a cool seaside market. At Snow Point just has the best vibe. Oh, it's so cozy and secluded, and it almost manages to bring back that warm feeling you got as a child when you could just enjoy the world with no mental anguish of any kind to make every waking moment of your existence miserable. I like Snow Point City, and the temple is cool. The routes are good fun to explore. I like the amount of tucked away caves hidden in places like the one below the bike bridge and near Solaceon Town. I also just like Sinnoh's smaller towns that you tend to miss on the map, so you sort of feel like you're just coming across a place like Celestic Town, or an event that takes place on an island way off the coast. Diamond and Pearl are one of the few Pokemon games with routes that I remember, mainly places like Route 209 and 216, thanks to their music and atmosphere. Victory Road is pretty bare bones here, and it's really nothing to sneeze at, but having the Pokemon League standing at the edge of the region like that adds to the whole dramatism of the ordeal. And I'll top off the breakdown with a shout out to the 3 lakes of Sinnoh: Lake Verity, Lake Acuity, and Lake Valor. They are just lakes, but they serve as a waypoint on your journey, and sort of help tie together the different extremes of the Sinnoh region. So you probably get the impression that I love Sinnoh. And yeah, northern locations will always hit different for me. I love the ethereal sense of divinity that follows you throughout this journey, and I love the concept of all the towns and cities and biomes for the region, on paper, and of course, the soundtrack wraps it all together masterfully. But it doesn't look that great. Diamond & Pearl's Sinnoh is presented in a bland and flat manner. The colours of the textures used are just drab and washed out. There's a lack of finish to every location, like they had a good idea for this area but didn't fill it out with smaller artistic details, like they forgot to add in the final polish. This isn't helped by the fact that Game Freak weren't quite able to figure out the DS's hardware for their first DS game, and it resulted in an annoying screen tearing effect. This is when the pixels on the screen are misaligned, which can really ruin the view even if the misalignment is extremely minor. The screen tearing makes it look like the pixels are shifting about and moving unnaturally every time you walk, and it looks even worse when you're riding the bike. So yeah, a washed out looking region combined with an annoying graphical error does put a massive damper on the experience in my eyes. Look, Game Freak knocked it out of the park when they were coming up with the concept of Sinnoh, and they were cooking up a hell of a storm when putting together the different sensations they wanted the world to convey. But yet, they just fell short with the execution, and Sinnoh turned out to be a big misfire that turned a lot of people off Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. It is what it is, I guess. Rightio, the gameplay. Look, if I have to explain Pokemon gameplay to you, then you just don't meet the barrier of entry for this video. I'm sorry. Why are you even watching this? Did you fall asleep watching YouTube and this video just auto-played as you sleep? Or did you get lost in my eyes in the homepage preview and I've just been staring at the screen for 10 minutes straight? If that's the case, well, I just don't blame you. Diamond and Pearl is the usual 8 gym challenge, then the Elite Four and Champion with a side order of defeating the evil team and catching them all. Overall, there's a good enough level of challenge in this process to keep you engaged. The only criticism I have is that the gym pacing is a little bit off, and sometimes there's big long gaps between gyms, and then all of a sudden you're doing 2 gym battles with practically no time in between. Cynthia is a freakishly difficult champion, but I like having a ridiculous challenge standing in the way of the credit screen. It makes beating the game feel all the more satisfying. The most noteworthy thing here is that Diamond and Pearl introduced the physical and special split to the Pokemon stats and moves. For the super nerds, I imagine this brought a new layer to competitive play, which ties in nicely with the fact that this is the first game with Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, allowing you to test your skills against players across the world. In the single-player experience, the split does make you think a little bit more about what moves you're using. But to be honest, I always just look at a Pokemon's design and decide whether or not to use a physical or special move just based on the energy it gives off. And hey, that strategy hasn't failed me yet. I did say this before, but there's no fire types here, which really upsets the balancing of the game. If you want to deal with grass and steel Pokemon without too much trouble, you really just gotta pick Chimchar as your starter. Now it's time for the elephant in the room, the thing that makes Pokemon Diamond and Pearl infamous. Yeah, I'll play the video here. So if you don't know, these games are slow. The battle animations are drawn out, and as you can see on screen right now, the health bars deplete slower than a giraffe on a Thursday afternoon. We could reach the heat death of the universe itself, and someone out there is still going to be battling a Blissey. The engine for Diamond and Pearl is just so sluggish. Walking is slow, the menus scroll slowly, the surfing animation is just excruciating. This game will test your patience like no other game, and odds are your blood's gonna boil every time you get hit with a random encounter when you're just trying to trudge your way to the next location of the game. It's not fun. Sure, emulators these days have a speed up button, but this is a DS review and there is no speed up button on this bad boy. To be honest, it kinda ruins the whole game. Why would I want Pokemon in slow motion? I touched a little on the Wi-Fi connection. Basically, this game kicked off Pokemon online play, and definitely laid down the groundwork for growing the competitive Pokemon community. And also, it's the first appearance of the GTS, which was cool for people who lived in more remote areas, since they can just deposit a Pokemon and hope someone wants it in exchange for the Pokemon they requested. Of course, these days, the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection has been shut down. But I remember visiting it and, well, everyone was just requesting legendaries, so if you're looking for a regular Pokemon, you're not gonna find it here. Nor can you, because the whole service is shut down. Anyway, I think in the gameplay, Diamond and Pearl added a lot of great mechanics that have definitely left their impact on the franchise, and it deserves all of that credit. But the game isn't fun to play. There's nothing wrong with how the gameplay actually works, but it's slow. So slow, oh my god, it's so slow. So obviously these games are losing some points. Bad gameplay will do that to a game. Also, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl has a story. Yeah, it sure does. Obviously there's the whole get the 8 gym badges shebang and becoming the champion, but let's focus on what's outside of that, and yeah, Game Freak attempted some grand concepts with this game. Emphasis on the word attempted, by the way. Like all Pokemon games, there's an evil team. In this game, you go up against Team Galactic. Team Galactic is made up of your usual grunts that mainly serve as roadblocks, but what sets them apart is their goal. The goal of Team Galactic's leader, Cyrus, is to harness the power of the Pokemon of space or time. It depends on the game. To destroy the universe and start a new one from scratch under his guidance. Endgame Thanos sort of saw this and was like, write that down, write that down! Besides having the evil version of my name, why does this Cyrus guy actually want to do this? Cyrus believes that humans have taken the wrong path, a path that has led to great strife and suffering in the world, and now it's too late for us to reverse course and take a new path. So, he wants to wipe the slate of reality clean and start fresh, because he has enough hubris to believe that he could guide humanity in the right direction. Cyrus largely takes a back seat in his own plan, relying on his grunts and commanders to capture the lake spirits and use them to create a chain to bind Palkia or Dialga, since legend tells Arceus created them for this purpose. The protagonist encounters Team Galactic at various points throughout their journey, and becomes wrapped up in the team's affairs because God knows Officer Jenny isn't gonna lift a finger. Anyway, after great effort, Cyrus manages to capture the lake spirits and forge the chain, then heads to the summit of Mount Coronet to summon Palkia or Dialga and bend them to his will. So that's an interesting setup. Team Galactic succeeds in capturing the spirits despite our hero's best efforts. Cyrus stands atop the peak of Sinnoh's highest mountain, having summoned a being with dominion over space or time, and is ready to reset the universe itself. So like Palkia or Dialga just show up for a bit, mess with reality, which just means a couple of shots of the sky looking like this, and then you battle them with your team, defeat the legendary, and that's it. All the build-up and the grand speak throughout the game about resetting reality, the Big Bang 2, so to speak, just ends with a funny little effect coming out of the legendary, and then it goes away once you defeat it. From there, Cyrus vows revenge, and you go on to fight the Elite Four and become champion. I'll never be able to get past how anticlimactic this finale is. Palkia and Dialga just sit there and then they go away. They're nowhere near the threat they're presented to be. And I'm a huge sucker for reality-bending villains and the fighting god cliché. But this wasn't it. The Sinnoh region is shrouded in mysticism and legend. And for the source of all that myth to just sit there at the finale and then dip, had me questioning what I even played the game for. Certainly not the riveting gameplay, that's for sure. I like the setup and the thematics of Diamond and Pearl's stories, but the way it all ends makes it feel like a solid quarter of the said story is missing, and it's getting some points docked for that. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl are precious to me, and really it had everything going for it. A well put together region, top level Pokemon designs, a large scale story, and a great soundtrack that still has me humming the Route 209 theme in my head to this very day. Unfortunately, it's dragged down by an engine that makes the gameplay mind-numbing at times. A boring visual presentation and a story climax that satisfies none of the build-up it receives, not to mention the balancing issues that just extend an already uncomfortably long feeling playtime. Too many aspects of these games feel half-baked and unrealized. So for my ranking, I'd have to put it in the number 1 spot, because there's nothing else on the list. Let's see how long Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl can defend its number 1 title, shall we? You know, it's sad that Pokemon Diamond and Pearl turned out the way they did, considering just how much the games had going for them. If only, oh, if only, there was another version of these games that fixes all of their problems and also adds in a ton of extra content to elevate Sinnoh to a whole new level. What a world that would be. Oh, On the 22nd of May 2009, Pokémon Platinum released in Europe. Now this was the first Pokémon game I ever owned. I saved up the £2 of pocket money I got in the post from my grandparents for 12 weeks straight. Then I headed over to the nearest Tesco and bought Pokémon Platinum with my hard-saved money. And I was overjoyed. This game is basically the cornerstone of my identity. Every aspect of my personality could probably be traced back to this game in some way, shape, or form. Pokémon Platinum is the definitive edition of Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, and pretty much boosts Sinnoh to actual greatness. Also, yet my green jumper's in the wash, you know, I was too lazy to get it dry, it was a long day at work, continuity be damned, okay? So what's different? Thankfully, the Diamond and Pearl engine was updated to run a bit faster. The health bars go down a little bit quicker, menus don't take anywhere near as long to scroll, and thank God they sped up the surfing animation. Just look at this side by side, and you get a real idea of how slow surfing in Diamond and Pearl was. Platinum still isn't a speedy experience overall, but it does make playing through the Sinnoh region a lot more bearable. Speaking of Sinnoh, the Sinnoh region of Pokémon Platinum is a Sinnoh region I fell in love with. The region has always been well put together in concept, but was held back by poor artistic representation, something that was changed in Platinum. Pokémon Platinum leans further into Sinnoh's inspiration, Hokkaido, a more northern region of Japan. This is represented through the patches of snow found all over the region, giving you a greater sense of its geography in the Pokémon world. This is also reflected in the designs of the player characters as well. They're dressed for the winter with nice scarves and warmer coats. I've always been biased to cooler northern areas in fiction, so having Sinnoh fully embrace that ticks all the boxes for me. On a smaller scale, some environment textures were tweaked to look a little nicer. It allows the tiles of the game to flow and blend together nicely, instead of feeling like slapped together textures and nothing more. A lot of blank spaces have also been filled out with more trees and fences to make the screen seem fuller. A lot of these changes may seem small, but remember, the DS screen is also very small, so a little change can make a big difference. Some cities have some substantial visual overhauls, like Jubilife City getting an improved modern look, and Veilstone City having an urban concrete aesthetic, which I think better matches its music. The new city designs are leagues better than the original, and every time I visit their old designs in Diamond and Pearl, it just feels gross and yucky. The altered textures, the heightened cold climate, and the redesigned cities allow the presentation of Sinnoh to finally live up to the potential of all the ideas it contains. This is the Sinnoh region that I explored as a child, and it's truly one of the best locations we've ever visited in a Pokemon game, and without Platinum, I'm sure it wouldn't be so highly regarded to this day. Oh yeah, there's also some new animations too. For example, the Pokemon backshots. The Pokemon back sprites for the first time in the franchise are now animated when you send them out. And the gym leaders and Elite Four have animated sprites at the beginning of the battle, which adds a nice bit of personality to them. There's some further tweaks to the gameplay, so I'll list them now. The Battle Frontier was added in Platinum, giving a more expanded post-game than Diamond and Pearl. Fantina's gym is now the third gym and not the fifth. The Pokétch was updated so you can switch through apps more easily. The balance of Pokemon across the region is improved, making it easier to find Pokemon of types you need for your team. The Versus Recorder allows you to record your battles and watch the playbacks. You could also upload these online and watch other players' battles, which I loved to do back in the day. And there was also a cool little villa in the resort area that you can customize and make your own, sort of like Animal Crossing. Last but not least, there's the Wi-Fi Plaza, which is just sort of an online mini-game room that you could go in and play mini-games with people from across the world. Obviously, it's now defunct. Of course, the biggest upgrade is the story. For the most part, it is the same story as Diamond and Pearl, but with some new moments and characters. Cyrus is a little more fleshed out. In Platinum, you meet him very early on at Lake Verity, where you overhear his mumblings about his plans for the world. It's a very small scene, but it introduces him into the plot at a more natural point, as it makes you aware of his character from the beginning of the game. There's also an added-in battle at Celestic Town against him, which helps establish him as a force to be reckoned with. There's also just a whole new character here, a character that stuck around in the Pokemon franchise for a good while after Platinum. Looker. First thing you may notice about him is that he kind of looks like the 10th Doctor. And I stand by the fact that this was intentional. The game did release in 2009 after all. I mean, come on, the Pokemon of time and space, does that ring any bells?
Time and relative dimension in space.
Come on, really? Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. Lucre is a secret agent with the International Police who's investigating Team Galactic. He always seems to conveniently show up just after the protagonist thwarts Team Galactic, so he recognizes the player's talent and has you help with his investigation. Lucre doesn't contribute any plot details to the actual story, but does a lot to add to the narrative's charm. Having the International Police on your side definitely makes the player's actions feel more important and lets you know that you're on the side of justice. Additionally, it helps Team Galactic feel more threatening, with the added context that they're big enough to catch the attention of Interpol. It also does help alleviate the weirdness of the fact that a kid with some roided up animals is single-handedly taking down a terrorist organization, so it does that too. Lucre is a welcome addition and gives the narrative a much needed seasoning. I think it says enough about his reception with fans with the fact that he's appeared in multiple Pokemon games after this with his own side stories. He has been weirdly missing on the Switch. I hope he's okay. But Silas, you beauty of a man, you may ask. What about the climax? Surely some extra story moments can't fix the fact that the ending doesn't live up to the build-up. And yeah, you'd be right about that. If they hadn't changed the ending, we have a new one now, and boy do I love it. So once you reach the climax of Mount Coronet, Cyrus summons the legendary Pokemon. But I mean Pokemon in the plural form. In Platinum, Cyrus summons both Palkia and Dialga to reset the universe. The Pokemon of time and space brought together to do his bidding. I mean, come on! Palkia and Dialga are a force to be reckoned with, and all hope seems lost as there's no way the protagonist could stop Cyrus with these two beasts under his command. But as it turns out, Cyrus's meddling with, the fabric of space and time made someone not very happy, which is pretty understandable if you ask me. Atop Spear Pillar, a black spot appears and begins to grow. A large shadow with glowing red eyes rises and snatches Cyrus into the void with its blood-red claws. This is where it gets real good. Turns out Cyrus has pissed off Giratina, the antimatter Pokemon, which had long been banished to a place called the Distortion World by Arceus. So he's basically Satan. The beast is enraged, so the player has to venture through the portal into the Distortion World with the hopes of calming Giratina and also saving Cyrus, I guess. In the Distortion World, the physics are wacky, gravity is weird, and platforms shift about all over the place, which makes sense considering it's the antimatter realm. You have to venture down into the bottom of this insane world to battle Cyrus one last time, and then you have to kick a Giratina's ass to calm him down from his gamer rage. Or you can just refuse to fight him, which impresses Giratina and he just calms down and then kindly opens up an exit back to reality for you, which is a very popular option with speedrunners. From here, Cyrus does his revenge vowing thing and you continue on to finish the gym challenge and become the Sinnoh champion just like before. Now that, in my opinion, is an ending worthy of all the build-up about destroying the universe. I'll never forget how blown away I was as a kid when Cyrus summoned Palkia and Dialga, then Giratina just makes his dramatic entrance and takes Cyrus away. Venturing into the Distortion World was mind-boggling back in the day and is still pretty cool for me today. It's my favourite Pokemon location. Sure, it just boils down to walking on walls and surfing on some impossible waterfalls, but the atmosphere, going further and further down into this violet void, with the gloomy yet somewhat soothing soundtrack playing, is just so immersive to me. I love how Giratina is flying about in there and swoops past out of nowhere with his unnerving cry every time you make progress. It's such a well-crafted set piece that brings the whole Sinnoh journey together. I wish it could have appeared in the Gen 4 remakes or Legends Arceus, but the original version will always do. I may have indulged myself a little in the Platinum section more than I needed to, but I really love this game. Its existence is just such a blessing since it saved Sinnoh from being relegated to the realm of mediocrity and brought out the region's true potential. Sure, there's nostalgia at play here, but it still holds up every time I replay it. So that's a glowing review from me, and obviously Platinum is going to take Diamond and Pearl's #1 spot. But let's give these games some credit, because without them, Pokemon Platinum would never exist. Wait, we have the green jumper back, that's good news. But, you don't get your continuity. I'm going to put on glasses, yeah? This video will not be consistent. The only piece of continuity in this video is the lack of continuity. Alrighty, now it's time for what a lot of people would call the big ones. Pokemon HeartGold and Pokemon SoulSilver. Truly beloved games amongst Pokemon fans, they released on the 12th of September 2009, and 14 years later, people are still singing their praises. Yeah. No, it's funny I should say that, yeah. Obviously, these are remakes of the 1998 Game Boy Color games, Pokémon Gold and Pokémon Silver. So pretty much everything here, the Pokémon, the region, and the story, are products of the Game Boy era translated into the DS, so that should be factored in here as we discuss it. Okay, so we're back to talking about the Pokémon, that segment. I don't love the Pokémon of HeartGold and SoulSilver. I just think they're really bland and basic, but to be fair, they were designed with the pixel count of a Game Boy Color in mind. The Cyndaquil line was pretty cool, and I love Typhlosion. Well, back then at least.
Look how they massacred my boy.
But the whole line is a little one-note and doesn't really surprise you in any way. Totodile has the most personality of the three starters, and I think the Totodile line definitely has the most distinction between each of its forms. But I do wish Feraligatr kept the blue patches on the yellow of his underbelly. I think it would have enhanced the primitive look they were going for. Chikorita is the grass evolution. Kinda stinks, but Bayleaf is cool. Shame that it evolves into Meganium, but sometimes life doesn't treat you the way you want it to. Now, Gen 2 had some cool new Pokemon. Togepi was introduced in Gold and Silver, and I like that line a lot. And Espeon and Umbreon are some of the better evolutions in my opinion. But really, I just don't jivvy-jive with Gen 2's designs at all. The colours are so bland and muted. I know a lot of Pokemon fans bust a load at the mention of Ken Sugimori, and yeah, his art style is cool, but I've never been big on most of the Game Boy Pokemon designs. Sorry. Okay, I'll soften the blow a little bit here, for the sake of keeping the peace. Ho-Oh and Lugia are so good. Really, for the first ever mascot legendaries, these designs are hard to live up to. Our boy Sugimori went into the kitchen one day and cooked up a storm. Look at how majestic and mythical they look. They're so perfect, and let's not ever forget Lugia's potbelly. He goes hard on the Rage Candy bars and rocks the look. God bless Ho-Oh and Lugia. Yet Gen 2's designs aren't for me, and HeartGold and SoulSilver's Pokemon selection has very few Pokemon that I'm excited to see when they pop up in the wild, which, you know, removes a bit of the fun from exploring the region. I have glazed over this segment a little bit, and that's because all of the problems I have here don't come from a DS angle, they come from a Game Boy angle. What this is a Pokemon generation that doesn't resonate with me very much, ported over to the DS. Which is great for those who grew up with these titles, but it doesn't do anything for me. Now, the gameplay of HeartGold and SoulSilver is basically the same as the Sinnoh games. Come on, it's Pokemon we're talking about here. The main difference here is that the game runs fine. The fact that my eyes aren't glazing over as a Pokemon's health drops, or when I scroll through a menu, already gives these games points where Diamond and Pearl got none. But the bar wasn't set very high in this department anyway. You'll be able to go through the gym challenge unencumbered by the engine, but the gyms may actually slow you down a little. These days, I have them down in my memory so much that I know my way past them like the back of my hand. But if you're not familiar with HeartGold and SoulSilver, then you may find yourself sweating in a few areas. I mean, the fact that Whitney has left us all permanently scarred says enough about Johto's gyms. There's probably some sort of romantic-based life lesson you could learn from that milk tank, but I'm not gonna go there today. This is about as standard of a Pokemon experience you can ask for, but there is one aspect of the gameplay in these remakes that's really cool. The Pokeathlon. You remember this thing? The Pokeathlon lets you compete in a gauntlet of sports like the hurdle dash, the snow throw, or the block smash. It was fun to control your Pokemon with the stylus and pick out which Pokemon would be best suited for each sport. It's a nice diversion and a good way to waste some time. To be honest, it's something they should really bring back. I think a Pokeathlon would work well with the different functionalities of the Switch Joy-Con. But I'd also be mad if my prize Greninja started drifting all over the screen, so maybe they should hold off on that idea. Now I'll mention the big kicker for these games, the big elephant in the room. This game has two regions, Johto and Kanto from the first Pokemon games. This is one of the big reasons Gen 2 is treasured by so many. Imagine beating all 8 gym leaders of Johto, then discovering there's a whole other region for you to explore, with 8 more gym leaders to battle. It's just a big second serving of more gameplay. If you like to build a good team and put it to the test, then you'll be able to do that here more than any other Pokemon game. Admittedly, Kanto is a little stripped down compared to its Gen 1 appearance, but who's going to complain about that when you're working your way through all those gym leaders? I'm never not going to love the feeling of connection in the Pokemon world Gold and Silver provided with the 2 regions together, and it's great to see it further realized with upgraded Nintendo DS graphics. From a gameplay standpoint, HeartGold and SoulSilver are amazing. The Pokeathlon can give you hours of grinding if that's what you want to do. It's the only Pokemon game to allow you to visit 2 whole regions, providing you with 16 gym leaders to fight, which is just insane. Sure, Kanto is a little more bare bones than it was in Red and Blue, but it's just so cool that it's even there. The only criticism I can give the game for having 2 regions is that it's never happened again. Every Pokemon game since has left a group of people holding out hope that we can visit multiple regions, and we always end up disappointed. Hell, it's still happening today. Even with Scarlet and Violet, I was secretly hoping that the DLC would let us visit the Kalos region, given Paldea is just south of it, but that didn't happen. I just want to know where the train from Kuraway Town goes. Is that too much to ask? I don't know, every time I step from Johto into Kanto, it just feels special. It's weird, but I like it, and I want to feel that way again. Normally, I talk about the region before the gameplay, but I wanted to hold off just a little bit. You see, about the region and story segments. Well, look, I get it. You all love this game because it's got 2 regions, and it's Gen 2 with more vibrant colors than a Game Boy, but don't you sort of think these games are a little bit... boring?
What?
No, alright. I know that sounds bad.
Listen, to me, Johto is completely unmemorable. I genuinely can't name any locations outside of Ecruteak City and Goldenrod City. Also Cyanwood City because of its music. The Johto region doesn't have a distinguishing landmark akin to Mount Coronet in Sinnoh, and there's hardly any variety in environment here. The Johto region stirs in me the same thing England does. Nothing. It stirs nothing. The whole place is just the same plain grassy routes and basic caves. Ecruteak City is nice, and the large towers are a well-designed place to encounter Ho-Oh in HeartGold. Now, the Whirl Islands do just about enough to distinguish themselves from all the other caves in Johto, but it's still a pretty underwhelming place to encounter Lugia in my opinion. At least there's no other places like Ecruteak in Johto. The Whirl Islands just blend in with everything else to me. Let's be real. Can you blame me for not remembering locations like, Blackthorn City or Mahogany Town? The whole place feels bland like potatoes with no butter, not even a bit of pepper. It's bland and basic, and the same problems apply to Kanto as well, which kind of detracts from the whole shtick of the game having 2 regions in my opinion. I'd rather have 1 vibrant region than 2 boring ones. But I like the Lake of Rage because it has the shiny Gyarados in it, which will always be a core memory for me. It was really cool when I found it, you know what I mean? Now admittedly, it is unfair for me to rag on Johto and Kanto when comparing it to DS games, considering both were originally made under the confines of the Game Boy hardware. That thing really is primitive, and at the time, I'm sure those regions felt wondrous and amazing. Johto seems to mean a lot to plenty of people who grew up with it as their first region. It is to them what Sinnoh is to me. I get that, and I respect it, but as hardware improved, so did the regions. Well, up until a certain point. And these days, I just don't think Johto holds up very well against its successors. Either way, it's great that it got remade on the DS for those that love it, but very little aspects of it appeal to me. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I tried to be reasonable, but I make it a rule that I always speak from the heart, and you gotta respect that. I should probably try and appease some HeartGold SoulSilver fans by giving it some praise. Yeah, not gonna do that. It's time for the story section! So, the story in these games is, There's not a lot here. There's the usual go out and beat the gyms, catch 'em all, that sort of stuff. Team Rocket are back after getting their asses handed to them by Red in Kanto. They're messing with radio waves to make Pokemon evolve so they can have stronger Pokemon to rebuild themselves after losing Giovanni, I assume. So you battle the grunts, battle with the higher-ups in the team, you battle Executive Archer at the top of a radio tower. He's sort of holding down the fort until Giovanni comes back. So you beat him and he disbands Team Rocket just because. So that's that. Pokemon Mafia disbanded, fan Dabby Dozy. After that affair, the radio director gives you a rainbow wing or silver feather, and you use it to encounter Ho-Oh or Lugia. From there, you wrap up the gym challenge and become champion. I guess it's worth mentioning Silver, your rival. He thinks he's better than you, then gradually comes to respect you sort of by the time you reach the Pokemon League. People like Silver, but that's because of the added context that he's Giovanni's son, and he hates Team Rocket because it caused his dad to disappear. All well and good, but it's a piece of side story that affects very little of the game experience. From the player's in-game experience, you're just gonna get a Garyoke 2.0, which to be fair is still appealing, but I can't say there's a lot of depth here. The story is very light and simple. To be clear, I praised Pokemon Platinum's story, but it's not like it's a masterpiece or anything. It has scale, and it has cool, big, powerful monsters who can bend space-time, and is a terrorist plotting to reset the universe. HeartGold and SoulSilver basically just has you battle a bunch of Team Rocket members to stop some bad radio broadcast. There is a little bit to chew on here with Silver's character in the Celebi event. Seeing how he was affected by his father abandoning him because of Team Rocket, that was interesting to see, but not quite enough to redeem anything. The story is just a step down in my opinion compared to what we were talking about before. For a lot of people, they play a Pokemon game for the experience of beating the gyms and building the right team to do that. That's not me. I need a story with some good stakes, or at least a story that makes an attempt at it. Just something nice that helps immerse me more in the world I'm exploring, and a narrative purpose outside of becoming the champion. For some, they don't need it, but I do, and this is my ranking, so I'm knocking HeartGold and SoulSilver down some points in the story department. Sorry. Oh, you thought I wouldn't mention it? Yeah, I'm mentioning it. To give these games some credit, putting you through a 16 gym long journey and capping it off with this. Yeah, finding Pokemon Trainer Red at the top of Mount Silver is an amazing way to cap off the journey. Fighting the character you once played as and became champion as, then facing him as Gold and eventually defeating the guy you beat Red and Blue as, it's so sick. I always wonder why they didn't do something similar in Black 2 and White 2, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. HeartGold and SoulSilver are great games. There's a lot of content here. 2 whole regions, fun mini games, and then the added element of the Pokewalker. People who want to build a team and challenge gyms will have a great time here, but if you're looking for immersion, you're not going to find it, and may end up feeling a little bit bored, kind of like I did. The region is uninteresting with very little notable locations, and the story is bare bones and does very little to pull you into the world. Again, both the story and the region are products of the Game Boy era. Pokemon was in its infancy at the time, and I doubt there was a crazy demand for universe-ending narratives involving deities of the Pokemon world. So it's not fair to pit it with DS games, but it's also not making the bottom of my list. I'll put it above Diamond and Pearl any day. Its smoother engine helps boost it past those games, and the wealth of content is still more enjoyable than the unrealized version of Sinnoh featured in Diamond and Pearl. But Platinum is going to keep the top spot because it's cooler, Platinum Sinnoh is the best, and it's got a big portal! It's got a big portal! I imagine this has ruffled some silver feathers, but if this upsets you, your time would be better spent drinking your cringe juice at your local cringe spot with all your cringe friends. Yeah, that's you told, isn't it? Let's move on from Gen 4. Gen 5, the 5th one, the Peter Davison of Pokemon generations, otherwise known as Gen 5. Gen 5 kicked off in 2010 in Japan and 2011 in the rest of the world with Pokemon Black and Pokemon White. These days I see Black and White get near universal praise, but not too long ago I remember it being very different, with lots of flack being thrown at these titles. After the deity fighting of Gen 4, Game Freak had to pull off a couple of tricks to disguise the inevitable downscaling of stakes in Black and White's Unova region. They did this in 3 ways. A complete roster of new Pokemon. No Pokemon from previous games feature in the main story. Only the 156 new Pokemon in these games. Which is a crazy number, and to this day is the largest amount of Pokemon ever made for one game. They also switched things up by creating the first region inspired by a location outside of Japan. Unova is based on the USA, more specifically New York State, giving it a fresh feel and helping it to stand out from the 4 regions that came before it. The third strategy they used was a story based on human characters that'll help us get more invested in the story Unova has to offer, and makes the downscaling of stakes from Gen 4 much more digestible. There's 156 new Pokemon here, so what I'll do is talk about the starters, legendaries, then list my 5 favourite designs outside of those groups, and also give my thoughts on the general art direction for the whole Pokedex. I think this is probably the best way to do Unova's Pokemon justice as quickly as possible, right? Okay, so we have Snivy, a Pokemon that I used to be pretty average on, but I've ended up liking it a lot more after finally doing a playthrough with them. I like how smug he looks, and the yellow collar things really brings the design together for me. Sure, he is just one big curve and not much more, but he's got a personality to him that I like. Servine, not really a big fan of this evolution. The head portion looks like a good progression of Snivy's character. I like the V-shaped collar and the way it makes his head look like when you peel back fresh bark on a tree trunk. What bothers me is that the arms and legs don't really grow with the body and sort of look stumpy and makes Servine look immobile. I feel like this could have been evened out with some flowing vines coming from the shoulders, but it is what it is. Superior, now there's a good design. The leg problem was solved basically by hacking them off, and now he looks much slicker and more agile. Snakes are cool, but again, I would have liked some more flowing vines coming from the shoulder areas. I don't really have much to talk about when it comes to Tepig, I'm sorry to say. Tepig is probably the highlight of this evolution line for me. He's round, bubbly, and looks like he's loving every moment of life. The second stage, Pignite, is not great. Tepig apparently learned to walk on 2 legs and lost all his cuteness. Now he's just a spherical gremlin. He looks like the kid in school that always brings in the stinky packed lunches. You know that one kid. I can only describe Pignite as having Buford Van Stom energy, if you catch my drift. Now, Emboar is like everything I just said about Pignite, but 5 times more extreme. He has a fire beard, which is pretty cool, but I'm just not rocking with the pale browns and the oranges in his design. Sorry to all the Emboar fans out there. I'm sure there are dozens of you around the globe. Alright, time for the big leagues. It's time to talk about my guy. Oshawott, what a little goat. Circular, blue belly, white face, and a red nose. You can't beat the red nose. Best of all, he has his little shell on his tummy, but don't be fooled. It's not just any old shell. It's a razor shell, and he will cut you up if you ever look at him the wrong way. It would be a hell of a feat to improve on this design, but then Duot comes along and blows this all away. First thing you'll notice about him is that he's not messing around. He dual wields razor shells and is always stanced up and ready for anything. Real talk though, I love the samurai armor-esque design from the flares on his legs, and the design of the razor shells just sort of complements that very well. And the white spiky whiskers adds to his no-nonsense look. Duot is very cool. It's a good sign when you actually think about not evolving Duot, because his design is just that good. But somehow it gets even better. Samurott is a top tier Pokemon, definitely in my top 5 of all time. What a sick guy. His design and name fully embraces the samurai inspiration. He has sheaths on his legs that actually have weapons in them, and get this, they're called scimitars. Like scimitar, but scimitar for water type. You get it, you follow along with me. Not to mention the giant spike coming from his helmet. This guy is dangerous and armed to the teeth with weapons. Also, I like his whiskers and his little nose. I think they're nice. The game's mascot legendaries, Zekrom and Reshiram, are possibly the best mascot duo in the entire Pokemon franchise. Their designs can really be boiled down to the phrase, cool anime dragons, but I like cool anime dragons. I really miss when Pokemon legendaries look nothing like any other kind of animals out there, because that's what really hits the spot for me in terms of design. Now, those of you with a keen eye may have noticed that one legendary is black and the other one is white. This is because the games are called Pokemon Black and Pokemon White. Zekrom's design is hard and metallic, and evokes a vibe of materials used at an electricity plant, which matches his electric typing. He's really just made to embody a bolt of lightning with those sharp edges on his design. Reshiram, on the other hand, is a fire type, and as such its design is much looser, with flowing hair and wings to invoke the untamed nature of fire. What really brings these designs together is their in-game animations. In battle, their sprites will occasionally glow as they power up, and it complements them so well. Oh yeah, and the Swords of Justice. And also the Weather Trio, which I'm pretty neutral on. They're guys in clouds. Way to go. Now here's my 5 favourite regular Pokemon designs. Whimsicott, Sock, Mienshao, Excadrill, and Zoroark. I like Unova's Pokemon a lot. Of course, since the game features exclusively new Pokemon, there's some filler designs here, like Patrat replacing Rattata, Woobat replacing Zubat, Roggenrola replacing Geodude, so on and so forth. Now, I do prefer these replacements over the usual filler Pokemon, which I suppose is a bonus, but that doesn't mean the designs stand out to me at all. I think Unova strikes a perfect balance between making Pokemon look alien to the real world, with designs like Reuniclus and Haxorus, but also still a part of the natural world, with Pokemon like Amoonguss, Zebstrika, Braviary, and Buffalant. Black and White do feature a fair few object mons. For those who don't know, that just means Pokemon inspired by inanimate objects. Object mods have been a source of controversy for a while, the most recent offender being Wiglet in Scarlet and Violet, which is clearly based on a dildo. I'm a fan of object mods, as they're always pretty funny to me or actually have a cool design. Chandelure is one of my favourite Pokemon and was really helpful during my last Gen 5 playthrough. The object mon that gets the most hate is Vanillish. It's an ice cream cone, that's it. Oh, what does it evolve into? Oh. Hate Vanillish if you want, but I give him the pass because it's just funny. I'll always find Black and White's Pokemon lineup refreshing. There's plenty of cool designs, and even the common Pokemon are brand new. The whole dex feels like it uses a different colour palette than the rest of the franchise, and I think that makes Gen 5's Pokemon some of the strongest in the series. There's honestly not much to be said about the gameplay of Pokemon Black and White. It's the same turn-based system where you battle trainers, 8 gym leaders, and take on the Elite Four, become champion. Yeah, the main thing that stands out is that it's just better than every other Pokemon game on the DS because it's way faster. Menus are quick, attack animations are short and snappy, the health bars drop at a reasonable speed, and the experience overall is much smoother and rarely challenges your patience. It should be said that I mark these games as the first point in the franchise where the gym battles started getting slightly too easy. The third gym may throw you off if you're unprepared, but besides that, none of them really made me sweat at all. So from that point of view, the gym leaders are a weak point of the game, but they also excel in different aspects that no other Pokemon game has managed to recreate since, which I'll talk about later. By the way, there's also triple battles and rotation battles. You can get what those are, which feel like they're just there because Game Freak wanted to put some sort of new battle modes in. These never really stuck, and it's telling that these modes never come up as a meaningful feature in future titles. For Generation 5, Game Freak ran out of Japan to adapt, so they decided to turn their focus to the land of the free. That's right, the colonies. The United States of America. Why did they do this? Because it was Junichi Masuda's dream to get his music played in a New York opera house, and he was hoping that they'd get to do that during the promotional campaign of Pokemon Black and White. No, seriously, that's the whole reason the Unova region exists, and also, just so you know, his music never ended up getting played in New York, but the region turned out great either way. The United States has so much variation in landscape and environment within its borders, and that makes it perfect for a Pokemon game. Unova bursts with diverse locations, rich cultures, and it's all brought together by the new seasonal system. The seasonal system meant that Unova would rarely stay the same, with the time of year in-game affecting the migration cycles of certain Pokemon, not to mention change the appearance of each location. Speaking of locations, let's talk about some of Black and White's standout areas to get more familiar with Unova. If we're doing the USA, we're doing New York. That's like one of the 4 actual locations in the United States. At the time, Cassilia City blew me away. The scale of the city was something Pokemon had never seen before. The buildings actually felt tall, with a changing camera angle selling the size of the skyscrapers surrounding you. Each street had its own separate loading zone, which allowed Game Freak to cram more into each area. There'd always be a flow of busy people, all heading to their own destinations, going about their lives in the Pokemon world. As you walk past, there's speech bubbles that pop up, highlighting different snippets of the murmurings of the crowd of people going past you. On the sides of each street, there'd be walls of buildings completely blocking out any view of the outside world, making it feel as though you were consumed by Cassilia City. I've always liked the atmosphere of these streets, but I will say that as a kid, I thought it was a little difficult to find certain locations when they weren't directly facing the camera. These days, I know the layout of Cassilia City like the back of my hand, but I still feel like it could be somewhat confusing for a newcomer. Either way, the bare essentials will be available to you on the front street of Cassilia, which is right next to the sea, and it's just a great location to show off the huge buildings in the city. This is the first time Pokemon ever really tried to have a sprawling metropolitan location, and I think they nailed it, especially when you consider they only had DS hardware to work with. Driftvale City is probably one of Black and White's most iconic locations, because, you know, it does this. Yeah, the music thing, remember that? It's another port city that hosts a market full of travelers and traders looking to buy and sell some more niche items. In terms of being the place that hosts the more obscure items like battle enhancing items or different incenses, I like this setup. I want to shout out Chargestone Cave. If we're going to have to tough our way through caves, they may as well give us a cool gimmick alongside it. Having a cave illuminated by electrically charged stones is a nice change of pace, and the floating magnetic rocks are an engaging yet unobtrusive puzzle. It's not particularly often we get an electric type area in Pokemon games, and this attempt at it definitely left a good impression on me. I hope we get more cool places like this one in the future. I'd just like some more electric areas that aren't abandoned power plants. Now, the routes give you a taste of every biome. Route 4 leads into a vast desert with builders scattered about as they work to build Unova's highways through the sand. Twist Mountain is a vast mining facility being stripped for ore because God knows you can't have a game based on America without involving fracking somewhere. Icarus City gives us the obligatory ice area. I will say I think this is one of the weaker ice areas in a Pokemon game. It doesn't really have anything in the way of the cozy sensation that I usually enjoy about these areas, but it's mostly inoffensive, though it does feel like it was just put there for the sake of it. I'll end off with Undella Town, which sits on the coast of Unova. I enjoy the serenity of Undella Town. There's not a lot here, but it's a nice out-of-the-way pit stop, and it really is great to check out all of the houses here. All the buildings are just so inviting. I just want to go inside and talk to everyone. Unova is a refreshing region for Pokemon. It tries something new outside of a Japan-inspired location and set the standard going forward for Game Freak when it comes to adapting foreign locations as Pokemon regions. I think this region shines the most in the artistic presentation. Gen 5 was the last time Game Freak used pixel art for a mainline Pokemon game, and you can tell this region is the result of everything they've learned from making games for the Game Boy all the way to now on the DS. The pixel art is so vibrant and colourful. Each season is complemented by leaves, snowflakes, or rays of sun dancing across the screen. Even the floor tiles of the cities have their own personalities. I think these games here stand as a good argument as to why JRPGs shouldn't abandon the pixel art style, since I really don't think Pokemon has looked as good ever since the jump to 3D post-Gen 5. Now, I suppose I should weigh in on the common complaint about Unova. It's completely linear. You follow along one route around the map with no variation whatsoever. Again, this comes down to how you like to play Pokemon. For me, the most valuable component is a story to immerse me in the region as much as possible, and Black and White 100% has that. I'm not complaining that Game Freak chose to keep it linear to guide me through the story they put together for these games, but of course, in an ideal world, there'd be a happy medium between story congruity and gameplay flexibility, but for my ranking, I'm not registering it as a complaint here. Given the fact that I just brushed away one of the most common complaints of Unova by saying the story is good, I should probably talk about the story. Word of warning, I'm probably going to spend a while on Gen 5's story because this video is basically turned into a DS Pokemon tribute with a ranking tacked on to the side. Once again, we have a Pokemon trainer who's left their hometown to catch them all, defeat the gyms, and become the champion of the region. So what's the twist here? Well, Black and White's journey is great because of the people you meet on your adventure. There's no deities being summoned to bend reality, or portals leading to another realm. The story is grounded by the characters you meet and how they enact their ideologies in the world of Pokemon. The evil team this time around is Team Plasma, and they're basically PETA but if they were terrorists. They believe that keeping Pokemon in Pokeballs, and even pitting them against one another in battle, is an abuse of the relationship between humans and Pokemon and confines Pokemon to lives of torture. Which, you know, it's kind of reasonable to be honest. I feel like every Pokemon player has looked at the actual concept of Pokemon and thought about how messed up it would be if we did this in real life. It's basically normalized dogfighting at the end of the day. I think it was a bold move from Game Freak to address this head on and gives them a good chance to add a bit more clarity to how things work in this world. Team Plasma seems to be led by a man called Getsis, and he doesn't really strike you as someone who actually cares about the livelihood of Pokemon. On paper, the real leader of Team Plasma is a mysterious man called N. Look, it says on the back of the box that he's mysterious. N was found as a boy by Getsis and raised to become the king of Team Plasma. The reason N has been able to rally the members of the team around his cause is because he can actually talk to and understand Pokemon, which leads him to have more empathy with Pokemon and the struggles he perceives them to have when made to battle. You cross paths with N multiple times throughout the game, and you end up battling with him. N notices that when he battles the protagonist, the voices of your Pokemon tell him that they enjoy battling and that they have a great bond with their trainer that's forged in the battles they take part in. This obviously throws N off as it contrasts all of his past experiences, probably since he's only ever heard the voices of Pokemon stolen by Team Plasma, who are always going to be miserable. Either way, these encounters always lead to discussions with N about the morality and the nature of the relationship between humans and Pokemon, which is a great way to engage the player by making them think a little bit rather than just threatening the entire existence of the universe or something like that. The relationship between N and the protagonist is meant to mirror their history of Unova. You see, in Unovan history, there used to be a royal family. The two princes of Unova shared a bond with a legendary dragon. At one point, the princes fought for control of the region as they disagreed over whether to rule based on the truth of the situation or based on the ideal imagining of the way things should be. The conflict between them tore the region apart, and the aforementioned legendary dragon split itself into two so it could be with both of the princes. One dragon representing truth and the other representing ideals. These two dragons obviously being Zekrom and Reshiram. As for what the original dragon was like, who knows, but I really hope Game Freak actually shows us it one day. So yeah, the discussions about how to handle the human-Pokemon relationship mirror the conflict of the princes in Unova's past, and even plans to summon a legendary dragon, which one depends on the game version, to challenge the Pokemon League and use his role as champion and the fact that he has this dragon at his side to persuade the people of Unova to release all of their Pokemon. As you can tell, the stakes here aren't too high. Sure, people would be upset if they had to release all of their Pokemon, but reality isn't about to be wiped out on an atomic level or anything like that. And yet, you're still hooked. The tension comes from the opposing ideologies, one of Pokemon battling being cruel and abusive, and the other of Pokemon battles strengthening and consolidating the bond between humans and Pokemon. N is presented in an interesting way. He's against you, but he doesn't want to harm you. You want to see where he ends up, how things turn out for him. You're invested in the human angle, and rather than feeling underwhelmed by the drop in the stakes, you're more invested than ever. Game Freak knew exactly what they needed to do to pivot from the time and space shenanigans of Gen 4, and they did it very well. To this day, N is a fan favorite character. People still talk about him and desperately wants another character done as well as him. All characters in Black and White are done well in my opinion. If we absolutely have to have a friendly rival, Sharon is probably the best way to do it. He studies Pokemon intensely and is constantly looking for new strategies to try and beat you. He genuinely cares about winning and is clearly upset each time you beat him, which is a lot better than future rivals who seem to pop off every time you wipe the floor with them. I like that Sharon is no nonsense. When he faces the threat of Team Plasma, he takes things seriously and actually feels like a force to be reckoned with. Now, Bianca is basically the exact opposite of Sharon. She's clumsy, shy, and not very good at Pokemon battling. Her character arc is an endearing story of self-discovery where she breaks free of her overprotective parents and becomes more confident the more she explores the Unova region. These days, it's not so much of a unique storyline, but it's great that she's a rival who realizes she wants to do something other than being a Pokemon trainer. She's inspired by Professor Juniper and decides to follow in her footsteps. Bianca's story is really heartfelt and stands on its own from the rest of the story as a sweet character arc that just makes you smile. I will say Bianca's parents are pretty much the only rational parents in the whole Pokemon universe. Their child is going on a journey filled with dangerous creatures around every corner. It's genuinely crazy to see an actual normal parental reaction to the concept of the Pokemon journey. Before I get to the finale of the story segment, I had to talk about the gym leaders of Black and White, which are to this day the best in the whole franchise. What makes them great is how they're willing to get involved. They actually protect their communities and use their strength as remarkable Pokemon trainers. They're sort of like the sheriffs of their towns, like in the old Western movies. It's great. When Team Plasma are up to mischief and tomfoolery, rest assured that Clay or Lenora will show up to lend a hand. It's just another thing that helps flesh out the world of Black and White, and also helps alleviate the absurdity of a teenager single-handedly taking down entire organised crime groups. At one point, Elisa even gets involved in Bianca's character arc and helps her father understand the benefits a Pokemon adventure can have on his daughter. I still think he's actually the only rational person here, but nevertheless. These gym leaders were actual people, and I'm honestly waiting for Pokemon to give us another set of leaders that even come close to Unova's. Let's wrap up this story segment because we have been here a while. What's great about this game is that the story finale and the act of challenging the Elite Four are one and the same. As I said before, N plans on becoming Unova's champion, so he can use the status to motivate the people of the region to free their Pokemon. So once you reach the champion battle, that's when the story also reaches its climax. Team Plasma's castle is risen from the ground surrounding the Pokemon League. N challenges you to a battle in the throne room of the castle, a duel between him and the protagonist, each side wielding the legendary dragon Zekrom or Reshiram. The setting is very grandiose, and having the battle take place in a throne room drives home the parallel between the two trainers and the two princes of Unova. Of course, the protagonist is victorious and N is defeated, but Ghetsis isn't too happy about this. N may have accepted his defeat, but as it turns out, Ghetsis had been grooming N from the day he found him in order to obtain the legendary dragon for himself and forcefully take control of the entire Unova region. Ghetsis challenges the player to yet another battle against his team and his terrifying Hydreigon. It's too strong. Once the battle is done, victory is yours. After dealing with that terrifying Hydreigon, the gym leaders escort Ghetsis out of the castle, leaving you alone with N. At this point, N has realized his whole life has been a lie. He doesn't know what to think. All he knows is that when he heard the voice of your Pokemon as they fought alongside you, he heard their bonds with their trainer grow stronger. N leaves following an impassioned speech on a journey of self-discovery, to find harmony between truth and ideals, accepting the truth as the foundation to an ideal future. With that, the credits roll and Pokemon Black and White ends. Now sure, my retelling doesn't do it justice, but this story is focused on the humans, not the all-powerful Pokemon, but the moral differences of human beings and applying real-world feelings and ideologies to the world of Pokemon, whether it be N's ideological conflict with the protagonist, or something as simple as Sharon's competitiveness and desire to become stronger. Pokemon Black and White is a game about humans, and humans in this game are done well, especially with characters like N. We've yet to see Pokemon characters like this in future gens, and honestly, I don't know if we ever will again. But if you had to find a way to bring down the scales from universe-ending deities, then Pokemon Black and White was the right way to do it. If you couldn't tell, I like these games. I really feel like these games are the culmination of everything the pixel era of Pokemon was working towards. The beautiful art style, the jumpy and emotive music, and an amazing take on the classic Pokemon story formula. If you're going to try and provide an in-universe justification for the weird relationship between humans and Pokemon, then you may as well write a banger story to do so. As for the ranking, which is actually part of this video, I will always love Pokemon Platinum, but Black and White are so much more polished gameplay wise and has so much soul in its atmosphere and narrative, so it's going to take the top spot on my list. You know, having properly realized human characters really makes me want to see more of them. I feel like Game Freak only scratched the surface with Unova. It's a shame that there isn't a way to see what becomes of these guys in the future. Ah, right. Yep, that's right. Pokemon Black and White became the first mainline Pokemon games to get proper sequels. Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2 released in June 2012 as the last Pokemon games to grace the Nintendo DS, and also the last Pokemon games to use the pixel art style. These games came into existence because Junichi Masuda pretty much knew that everyone would expect some sort of a Pokemon Grey version. That would be something like an enhanced version of Black and White, sort of like what Pokemon Platinum was. But he wanted to do something unpredictable and craft a sequel to Black and White's story. This decision was also made due to the feedback he received from the team during development about how much they liked N's character, and that prompted Game Freak to take the story further. These games will always be a standout to me. Nowadays we get DLC for our new Pokemon games, which sure, it's cheaper for the customer, but it also means there's less room to further flesh out any story, since the DLC is an expansion and not a full game. So how do these games shape up to the rest of the list? And yet, look, listen, I'm in a completely different outfit. I got the cold between recording sessions, and I dropped continuity because my acne has completely rearranged itself, so what's even the point? There's not much to say for the gameplay segment. It's identical to Pokemon Black and White. The main difference in the flow of the game is that you start your journey on the opposite end of the region to where you started in Black and White. This does help make the game feel fresh in the early sections, despite the fact that it takes place in the same region. The game is as smooth to play as Black and White, and once again is a culmination of the efforts of all the previous pixel-style Pokemon games. I suppose the big difference here is that from the get-go, there are Pokemon from all previous generations available in the wild. We're no longer restricted to just the Unova dex. This was definitely the right call. The all-original Pokedex of Unova was refreshing, but if we had to play another game with the exact same selection of Pokemon, it would have felt a lot more tedious. Black and White 2 are set up to give you a very different team to the one you traveled with in Black and White, making the game feel even more like a whole new adventure. And now, in terms of post-game, Black and White 2 feature the Pokemon World Tournament, where you fight in an arena against trainers from all across the Pokemon timeline. It doesn't make much sense as to why a lot of these guys are even here at all, but it's better to just sit back and enjoy the Gen 5 remixes of old Pokemon songs. Now, one thing I do have to fault this game for is that the gyms are a fair bit easier than Black and White. Sure, they start out a little difficult thanks to the limited selection of Pokemon in the opening areas, but once you clear the first gym, the rest feel pretty easy to get through. I'd go as far to say that if you got me to pinpoint exactly where Pokemon gyms lost their challenge, I'd say it started in Pokemon Black and White 2. Alright, the region segment, it's Unova again, all the same locations, same regional systems, but there's some new areas here. The areas help pad out some space along the map of Unova, and sometimes further expand existing cities. I'll quickly go over what's been added here and what I think of it. Aspertia City is just one of my favourite starting areas in the whole Pokemon franchise. I like how modern and built up it is. I definitely prefer having a proper city as a starting town rather than just a small village. The city contains the Pokemon School and the first gym, so it condenses all of the early game faff into one location that you don't even have to journey to. Aspertia City's atmosphere is honestly a great reintroduction into Unova, and the music here is catchy. Verbank City has been expanded to include the Verbank Complex, which is a new area to encounter different wild Pokemon, and there's also some new trainers here to fight. The city is now home to the Poison Gym, which is a cool punk rock aesthetic and a unique song to go along with the band. Caecilius Sewers add an underground area to Caecilius City. It's essentially a new cave with an industrial setting, but if you're looking for a rock and roller, then this is a good place to find one. It's fun to poke around in, but its purpose is mainly to facilitate a Team Plasma event. Flossacy City is located to the west of Aspertia City. It's a small ranch town that brings a cozy vibe to the early game, which is nice. Join Avenue is located on Route 4. It's a long hallway, but if you stop and take the time to build it up, you can have a nice few shops going in it. The main appeal of this place was to invite other players to your Join Avenue, but since the DS online servers have been shut down, there's not much incentive to spend time here these days. God, time just passes, eh? Now, since the event of Black and White, a marine tube has been built to connect Undella Bay and Humilau City. It's a visually impressive route that lets you run along the seabed, looking at the water-type Pokemon swimming past the glass walls. It even has a nice theme to go with it. I want to give a shout out to the Cave of Being, where you can encounter the lake spirits from Diamond and Pearl. I'll never forget this place because when I was a kid, I took a look at the description of the location in the map, where it states that the cave is believed to lead to the Sinnoh region somehow, and I genuinely thought that I could go to Sinnoh in these games, like I was playing HeartGold and SoulSilver. I spent what felt like forever in that cave, trying to see if I could just heaven sent my way to the Sinnoh region. Those were simpler times. Anyway. One of the things I love most in video games is going back to an old area in a newer game and seeing how the progression of time has changed things. It's part of why I think the Yakuza series is so cool. Seeing the way the world of Unova has changed over the past 2 years helps build your emotional attachment to it. You feel like you've been a part of the world's development. Unova is such a beautiful region, and getting to see it expanded and explore new areas with a black and white art style is a blessing I'll never take for granted. I would kill for anything like this in a new Pokemon game. Well, I've tried that, and trust me, it doesn't get you anywhere. Listen, we're in the final stretch here. I know we've been at it for a while, but I have to break down Black and White 2 Story. The narrative is what makes Gen 5 for me. By the way, if you are still with me this far into the video, God bless you. First things first, this game takes place 2 years after Pokemon Black and White. You play as a new character, Nate or Rosa, depending on which option you pick. As usual, the player embarks on a journey to become champion of the region, blah 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 blah. This time around, Unova has a whole set of new challenges. Team Plasma has re-emerged with a new scheme to take over Unova. However, Team Plasma has split into 2 separate factions. Those who are loyal to N and are seeking to make reparations for the harm they caused in the previous games, and those who are loyal to Getsis because they were fed a false retelling of events where N betrayed Getsis and thwarted their evil scheme. For the first chunk of the game, the story mainly serves just to set up all of the aftermath of Pokemon Black and White to the player. Bianca is now Professor Juniper's assistant, and you even receive your starter Pokemon from her. Charon is the first gym leader at the Pokemon school in your hometown, a natural place for him to end up, seeing as he likes to study Pokemon battles in depth. The story is pretty passive for a while and does lean heavily on the context of Pokemon Black and White. It basically takes its time allowing you to piece together the state of the world. Now, there are some events that trigger when you enter certain locations if you have data from Pokemon Black and White in your system. These are flashbacks to what N was doing after his departure at the end of the previous game. They show his journey of self-discovery as he rediscovers the true nature of the relationships between humans and Pokemon, leading to him setting up his new faction of Team Plasma. But what's Getsis Team Plasma up to? Well, they're pretty blunt with their intentions this time. Getsis' plan is to use the husk left behind after the dragon split into Zekrom and Reshiram, otherwise known as the dragon Kyurem. And hey, Team Plasma already has Kyurem in their captivity, and use it to power their flying frigate, which is their new HQ. I like the Team Plasma frigate since it stands apart with its icy atmosphere caused by Kyurem's ice powers being used to keep it running. It's good to have a villain with a moving base, since it spares the player the usual cave gauntlet of Team Plasma grunts. Anyway, Getsis basically wants to use Kyurem's overwhelming ice powers to bring Unova to its knees. And whilst the player is in the midst of researching the legends of Kyurem, the Opelucid City gym leader reveals his family heirloom, the DNA splicers, which are believed to be connected to Kyurem somehow. Now, before initiating his plans of world domination, Getsis makes a pit stop at Opelucid City, raining down Kyurem-powered ice blasts from the Plasma Frigate onto the city below. Amidst the chaos, Team Plasma steals the DNA splicers from Drayden and blasts off in their frigate. And also, just a side note, this was a really cool set piece. It was nice to see an iced-out version of Opelucid City, even if it was only for a brief time in the game. Team Plasma is tracked to the Giant Chasm, where a significant dip in temperature is being detected. The player heads there to confront Getsis and to try to stop his evil plan, of course. But Getsis isn't messing around this time and tries to murder you using Kyurem. No Pokemon battles, he just tries to impale you with a bunch of icicles. But before the game can lose its PEGI 3 rating, a blast of fire or a bolt of lightning, depending on the game, rains down from the sky and melts Kyurem's ice. N himself descends into the chasm atop Zekrom or Reshiram, ready to face Getsis alongside his own faction of Team Plasma. This version of N is steadfast in his beliefs. He's been on his journey of self-discovery and knows his place in the world. Getsis and N head to battle using their 2 dragons, but it turns out Getsis was sort of counting on N to turn up this whole time. You see, the DNA splicers Getsis stole can be used to fuse Kyurem with Zekrom or Reshiram, seeing as their DNA is compatible since they all came from the same original dragon. A dragon which I still want to see in a Legends Unova game, by the way. The DNA splicers are activated, and End's dragon is forcefully fused with Kyurem, creating either black Kyurem or white Kyurem, depending on the game. Even after all this time, Ghetsis was still able to manipulate N in order to achieve his goals. With his new dragon, Ghetsis plans to freeze the entire Unova region, and use the promise of thawing the ice with the lightning of black Kyurem or the fire of white Kyurem to force the people of Unova to allow him to control the region. Now from here, N begs you to stop Ghetsis and rescue Zekrom or Reshiram. You take on Kyurem in a climactic battle, and you and the team you've crafted throughout the game end up victorious. Ghetsis has a complete mental breakdown at this point and is escorted away by his subordinates. Can't blame him, to be honest. If I lost to a 16-year-old twice whilst wielding the power of a legendary dragon, my ego wouldn't be doing too well either. With this, Unova is saved once again, and you go on to become the champion of the region. N challenges you to a duel in the ruins of Team Plasma Castle, and once you defeat him, he parts ways with the legendary dragon, so he can teach you the same lessons he learned from it 2 years ago. It's also worth a quick shout out to the scientist Colrus. He studies how to bring out the power of Pokemon, and works with Team Plasma just for the funding. He's not exactly evil, but he is open to examining any method of powering a Pokemon, whether it be through bonds and affection like the protagonist, or torture and abuse like Ghetsis. I like that he serves as a grey area between the Team Plasma of N and the Team Plasma of Ghetsis, and I hope he pops up again someday, as he did briefly appear in Alola. I'm well aware that I spent a lot of time in the stories of the Gen 5 games, but that's because the story is what gives this generation its identity, and as I said before, I sway heavily towards story-focused games. Black and White 2 Story doesn't focus directly on human characters like the previous games, but instead focuses on the imprint humans like N and Ghetsis have left on Unova, and how people can be changed by those ideologies. I'd say it's definitely a lot more blunt than Black and White's story, and in a vacuum where it doesn't have Black and White's context to lean on, the story is very simple in some places. But treating this as part of the same package as Black and White enhances the story and immerses you into Unova as deeply as it possibly can. So where does this final game go on the ranking? It plays exactly the same as Pokemon Black and White, and the story is a worthy continuation. The gyms are a little easier, but the new locations of Unova helps flesh the place out and enhances your sense of adventure. I think, and this is extremely hard to choose, I'm going to have to give the top spot to Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2. It's a hair's length between the two, but I just love the satisfaction Black and White 2 brings me. Even though the story is a sequel, it still has all the characteristics of a definitive edition game. With the wider pool of Pokemon and the fleshed out Unova region, Black and White 2 are a joy to adventure through, and that lets it just about take the top spot for me. Whoa, now that's the end of the video. It's a big long one, I know, with multiple outfits worn throughout the whole damn thing. This video is a ranking, but also an extended breakdown of everything I love about this period of Pokemon that defined my childhood. It's 100% the franchise at its best, and it's refreshing to go back and look at them, since we're stuck with whatever sludge Game Freak is putting out these days. Just, a little tribute from Silas OS himself. From Diamond and Pearl to Black 2 and White 2, I love all these games to bits, no matter where they ended up on my ranking. Let me know if you think my list is great and amazing, or if you're annoyed that Pokemon Link wasn't included here, you can, let me know that too. I appreciate any comment I get. Thank you very much for watching my video. Please subscribe if you liked it, and hey, here's to the DS era of Pokemon.